Let's look here in Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31 is a very interesting passage because there is a lot of speculation on who exactly it's written about, or at least as far as who it is written by. There are a lot that think that this is Bathsheba that's teaching Solomon, and she's using a word and a term for the name descriptive, just meaning given to the Lord, but I don't really see that. Again, there's some that look at this really doesn't, the implication of this, who this is really about, we don't fully know. What we do know is the teaching it is, again, tremendous teaching about a virtuous woman later on, but also some of the teaching about a king and how a king should live his life. And so in chapter 31 and verse 1, it says, the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. This word and this instruction that his mother taught him. So again, there is speculation. Some would say, well, this is Solomon, and you can't fully say that. We don't really know. What we do know is that this is a mother that is teaching her son, who is going to be king, and teaching him how he is to live. There is a story about Albert Einstein's mother, who she wrote to him years ago. It was actually on October 22nd, 1905. His father had received a letter from Albert Einstein, and the letter had an article that he had wrote, and basically in the article it was on the electrodynamics of moving bodies. You ever read that article? I don't think that was a very famous article. But anyway, this was laid out the first time that he actually kind of gave his theory of relativity. And so he sent that letter to his father. It wasn't addressed to his mother, it was to his father. But his mother sent him a letter back responding to him. Her name was Louise Einstein Rosenberg. And she worked in a grain field and in Württemberg. But she had basically wrote in the letter, and she kind of was a little bashfully wrote, but she reproved him, sending the letter to his father and not to her, not addressing her as well. And basically she said, Albert, I want to be part of your life too. She said, I may not understand. I may have worked out in the cornfields, and I don't understand all that you're talking about, but I want, paraphrasing here, but in the letter she said, I want to be part of your life. Could you just explain it in layman's terms? Could you just, and she said there at the end, simpler, Albert, simpler. And of course, he sent a letter later on trying to explain. And she had to send another letter back to him and say, I appreciate you trying to explain it, but I need it simpler, Albert, simpler. Just make it, I can't fully understand, but I want to know what you're talking about. I want to know about the scientific terms. I want to know. And of course, she ended up sending a third letter that basically said, Albert, simpler. But there were some that actually said she did understand what he was meaning. And there were times, in fact, one talked about that there were times whenever Albert and his father would be in another room discussing different theories and things, that she actually described his theory of relativity in a better way than they would. But the moment that they would come in the room, she just, I don't know what I'm talking about. I just work on the cornfields and things, and they leave it to them. But again, I think it's a wonderful story to really see how though she didn't understand and fully get what he was talking about and his passions, she wanted to understand. She wanted to know, and she wanted to be part of his life in many ways. And here, the mother of King Lemuel. Some believe that his name is very similar with Samuel, and we'll see also why. But notice verse 2, what my son, and what the son of my womb, and what the son of my vows, She says, I want to advise you, the son of my vows. What does that mean? Well, she had been praying for a son for a long time. That's really what it's talking about. And it's also talking about similar when you read about Samuel. And if you remember the story about Samuel before, he was born, his mother had prayed and prayed to have a child. And Hannah prayed and prayed, and she said, if God, you give me a child, I will what? Give him back to you. And this is what she's talking about. She says, you're the son of my vows. You're the one. God gave, he gave me to you, but I'm giving you back to God. Back to God. Well, again, I think we're off to a good start when we're looking at a godly mother, don't you? And so she is saying, you are the son of my vows. I prayed for you, and I've dedicated you to God. And then we're going to notice three things that she really tells her son and encourages him in. Here, she says, if you're going to be an honorable king, you need to, one, guard your heart. She says, give not your strength unto women. Now, this idea is unto loose women. And she's saying, don't go after loose women. Don't give your life over to women. Don't allow that to dictate your life. Can you think of an example maybe that she also has in her own mind when she's teaching her son this? I believe one who was one of the strongest men in the Bible, Samson. By the way, if this was Solomon, he didn't listen, did he? And so she says, be careful, guard your heart. Samson gave his heart to a woman, to many women, but he gave his heart to a particular woman who ended up having him in bondage, arrested, and captured by the Philistines. So she says, guard your heart. She says also in this, she goes on to say, nor do not give your ways to that which destroys kings, to that which will ruin kings. Don't go in the path. You need to guard your heart. Be careful in your life, because you can come to the place of ruin if you're not careful in that. She says, it is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink, lest they drink and they forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. She says, guard your heart. Don't become foolish like Samson. Don't fall like Solomon. Don't live a life of pride within your heart and life. And she also says, strengthen your mind. She says, not only to guard your heart, but strengthen your mind. Be sober-minded. Don't live a life of, again, you're going to be in a position not so you can do whatever you want, not so you can have all the power and authority and live the party life, but it is that you are in this position to do the most good. And if you come to the place where you subject your mind to awful things and you begin to be drunken, you will make foolish decisions. She says, strengthen your mind. Don't allow alcohol to ruin your life. She says, lest they forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. Give strong drink to those who are ready to perish. Let it be to ones who are ready to pass away. Let wine be to those who have heavy hearts. Let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his misery no more. But she says, my son, that's not for you. You're in a position, you have great responsibility in your life. There are in between 2020 and 2021, there was 178,000 deaths here in the United States over excessive alcohol. That's 488 deaths per day. She says, do not allow yourself to go this way. She says to be strong, guard your heart, strengthen your mind. And she also says here, defend the helpless. Notice in verse 8, open your mouth for the dumb. She says, for those who cannot speak for themselves, you defend them. You speak for them. You stand up for what is right. She says, open the mouth for the dumb and the cause of all such as are appointed to destruction. Speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of those who are defenseless, who cannot defend themselves. She says, open your mouth and judge righteously and plead the cause of the poor and needy. She says, if you do these things, you'll be an honorable king. Guard your heart, strengthen your mind, and defend the helpless. Again, this is far from many of the kings that we read about when we read in 1 Kings and in Chronicles, and it talks about what did they do? They lived lives for themselves. They did what they wanted. They treated others harshly. They abused many. And so here she says, don't live a life like this. Be one to be a defender. Be strengthened in your mind, guard your heart. So that is what we see, the instruction that she gives to her son about an honorable king. But then she doesn't stop there, because the rest of this passage is actually in the Hebrew alphabet. You're going to find that sometimes in the scripture. Lamentations is like that. Psalms 119 is like that. There's several passages in the scripture where they actually would have it kind of in an alphabetical list. Hebrew alphabet. Why? For them to understand it more. So I think for us, we need to realize that this is something you ought to focus on, right? Because if they put it in an alphabetical list for them to help themselves remember it, I think we should kind of focus on it too. Correct? I need to grab this sign here maybe. Okay, so let's look here at what she gives. This is this alphabetical list that we find. Verse 10, who can find a virtuous woman? So she talks about an honorable king, but then now she's describing a virtuous woman. A virtuous woman. She says, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. Far above rubies. Well, I think about the scriptures where it says, a prudent wife is from the Lord. A prudent wife is from the Lord. Now I can fully say, God gave me my wife. A prudent wife is from the Lord. And the scriptures also say that he that finds a wife finds a good thing. Finds a good thing. She says, who can? It is very difficult. You know, it was difficult in that day and time to find a virtuous woman. God could do it. And God could lead that way. Think about Isaac. And you read about Isaac and the servants searching for a wife for him. Who found for him? He prayed to God. God found the wife that Isaac needed. So she gives that question, who can find a virtuous woman? If you do find her, a virtuous woman, her price is far above rubies. And really she's saying that her value is priceless. Priceless. If you find a virtuous woman, her value is priceless. And then she'll give this description of a virtuous woman. And so we want to see here the description that takes place. In verse 11, the heart of her husband does safely trust in her. He relies and he believes in her. And she is trustworthy. That's what she's saying. She's trustworthy in her life. I saw this week that a mother of a 3-year-old in Texas called. Now it was her ex-husband. They were going through a divorce and they were going through a custody battle. But she had the 3-year-old contact the father. And she had him say goodbye to the father. And then she killed the 3-year-old and killed herself. Out of bitterness and just to stick it to the husband. Now that is sickening and it is horrible, but I'm telling you, this stuff goes on. And it is a travesty. But we see there's some that, again, she said, well, if I can't have them, no one can. No one can. How terrible. And the father could do nothing. Absolutely nothing. We see here that a virtuous woman, the husband, she's trustworthy. And there's no fear of her hurting the family in bitterness, causing issues and problems and anger. He trusts her. She says that he does safely trust in her, so that she shall have no need of spoil. And the reality is this, is that she's not going to seek to gain anything out of dishonesty and cheating. And she says she will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She's trustworthy and she is considerate. It is not about her, but her life now is about her family and her family's needs. That's what it's about. We live in a society today that says, no, don't worry about them. It's time for you to celebrate yourself. Live for yourself. Do what you want to do. It's about you and your life. And I remember reading an article about a mother. She had raised 3 boys, and she talked about, I regretted it. I regretted making them first. I should have lived life for myself. Did things what I wanted to do, and now here I am old, and what do I got to show for it? What do I got to show for it? I hope those boys never read that article, but they probably did. And how sad. What do you got to show for it? Well, you have three ones that have been able to be part of society, to live their life and try to make an impact and an influence. But it's sad. I remember years ago, a mother that her and her husband married about 25 years, and when I was pastoring in Texas, and she went to her husband one day and said, I'm done. I don't want to be with you anymore. And boy, tears in his eyes. I mean, again, he wasn't abusive. He didn't hurt her. He loved her. He cared for her. But, he said, why are you leaving me? She said, well, I'm almost 50. I got to live a little. But this is society. This is where we are. Feminism. Do what you want. Well, a virtuous woman is the one that says, it's not about me, but I'm here to sacrifice, and I want to meet the needs of the family. Not because, I'm enslaved. I can't. No, you are to do these things unto who? The Lord. The Lord. And the same when the scriptures teach about the husbands loving their wife as Christ loved the church. And I try, whenever I have counseling with ones they're getting married, I try to explain to them, if the husband will love the wife as he's called to love her, she will have no problem submitting as she's called to submit. But then I've also had to counsel ones that I'll say, well, she don't come first. My mom and daddy come first. And she'll say, it's the same thing for me too. Mom and daddy come first. He don't come first. Well, those don't last too long. I try to explain to them, you put Christ first above your family, above anybody else. But then you better also know that two are going to become one. One. Well, the virtuous woman understands that she's trustworthy and she's considerate. She's considerate. And then we notice as we go on here in verse 13, she seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. And there's ones that'll sit there and try to say, all she's doing is keeping the home and she does nothing. No, this woman, she is a businesswoman in a sense. But what she's doing is she's trying to utilize whatever efforts and means that she's able to do to provide for her family. And so we see here in this, it says that she's looking for the wool and the flax. She works willingly with her hands. She's like the merchant's ships. She brings her food from afar. She's not going to just settle for less for her family. She wants to provide for them, but also she will go to great lengths to get the best that she can offer for her family to provide. She's like the merchant's ships. She goes far. She rises while it is yet night. She gets up real early when it's night and gives meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. When I was in Moldova years ago, and we stayed in a village for a couple of days, and the ladies there would get up about 3 o'clock in the morning. Of course, as a teenager, I'm just laying there thinking, what are they doing? Let me sleep, let me rest, and I don't know what they're doing. I'm just hearing stuff banging around and clanging and everything else. And then you're hearing the chickens outside. But what are they doing? They're out there getting everything ready for breakfast. So hours they're toiling and laboring, providing. Again, we just haven't. Now, for some, sadly, my generation, we're not used to that anymore. It's McDonald's, Hardee's, it's a cereal box. But used to, it wasn't a problem to get up real early and start making eggs and biscuits and, everything we had this morning. It takes time and it takes labor and effort. But we see the virtuous woman, she wants the best for her family, the best. And she goes far and she'll get up early and she'll stay up late because she's trying to provide for her family. And notice she rises while it is yet night. In verse 15, she gives meat to her household. She also gives a portion to her maidens. Ones within the home, helping her, that she cares for all of those within her household. She considers a field. She buys it with the fruit of her hand. She plants a vineyard. What we see here is she's sacrificial and she's hard working. And there's several things in this. One, we notice she is committed, not complacent. 2, she is a planner. She is not a procrastinator. 3, she is industrious. She is not idle. She plans these things. She doesn't just set it aside. She doesn't procrastinate. She's trying to focus on what's ahead and seeing what the bigger thing and trying to understand what will help down the road. It's not that she's worried, because we're going to notice as well. Notice in verse 17, she girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. The idea of this is that hard work is nothing foreign to her. She doesn't mind getting her hands dirty. She doesn't mind a little hard work. And then it says here, she perceives that her merchandise is good. Her candle goes not out by night. She will stay up late if she needs to. She tries to make sure everything is in order and in place. She lays her hands to the spindle. Continually, she's seeking to make clothing for her family, to keep them warm in the time of cold, and her hands hold to the distaff. She stretches out her hand to the poor. She reaches forth her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow. So what we see here is she's sacrificial, she's hardworking. And in that, she's committed, not complacent. She's a planner, not a procrastinator. She's industrious. She's not idle. She's selfless, not self-seeking. Not self-seeking. She even goes and cares for those in need outside of her own household. And it says she's not afraid of the snow. She doesn't have worry and concern. Why? Because she's already prepared for those things. She's already planned ahead. And she trusts in the Lord. So we see these things, these principles within a virtuous woman. The sacrifices that she's willing to make. The working hard if need be. The reality is she's compassionate and peaceful as well. It says she's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders in the land. People know of her. Her compassion and her kindness, everybody knows. They know. And the example that she sets, people see how she lives. It is sad because I grew up in a family. Some of the cousins in my family, they would for years, it was always about them. And about, well, you know, if I had this much, I could do this, but I don't. So this is why I do these things. And it was always just simply, again, it's sad because I saw where the children that they would raise, they just kind of leave them off. Let them do their own thing, not really care. There was no sacrifice, no trying to provide, no care for that. And then any time there was ever an instance where somebody would just say, why don't you care for that? Well, you don't understand what I've been through. Well, you don't know what's happened to me in my life. And again, it's sad because it was always just about me. And then have children that were left off. Oftentimes the grandparents, the ones that having to take care of them. Over and over. It is sad because that happens so many times. Paul talks about it in Timothy and he talks about it in Titus. That the older women in Titus in chapter 2 and verse 1, he says, speak the things which become sound doctrine. That the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith, and charity and patience. And that the aged women, the older women, likewise, that they be in behavior as becomes holiness, that they will seek to live a life of holiness, not to be false accusers, not to be slanderers, not to be gossipers, not to drink much wine, but to be teachers of good things. And that they would teach the young women to be sober, teach them to love their husbands and to love their children, and that they would teach them to be discreet. They would teach them to be chaste and modest and keepers of the home. They would teach them to be good and obedient to their husbands. And he says, why? So the word of God would be not blasphemed. Because the life that they lived, they set an example. And you can say all day long you're a Christian, but if you live a way where you completely don't care about your family, don't care about your husband, don't care about that, and it's all about you, you're saying one thing: I don't believe in Jesus at all. So we see here a virtuous woman is compassionate and peaceful. as well. She strives to prepare for the worst, but she is calm in the midst of the raging storms of life because she knows the Lord has it in control, and she's done all that she can do. And then notice as we go on in verse 22 or in verse 25, strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. When she speaks, she's going to give words of wisdom and encouragement. Her tongue is the law of kindness. Her tongue is the law of kindness. And simply means that when she speaks, she's going to give wisdom and instruction and counsel, and she's going to edify and encourage. And there are some, sadly, what happens? My wife is very sweet and very kind, and she has to remind me so many times, honey, you didn't have to say it that way. You didn't have to say it that way. Yeah, I did. You didn't have to say that way. I wish. And I have to work on those things, and I have to allow God to work in my life in that. Because I sit there and I hear her when she says things to people, and I'm like, how do you do it? How can you be so kind? And yet, a virtuous woman is known. And when she speaks, she gives words of wisdom, but she also gives them in kindness. And it says here in the latter part, she looks well to the ways of her household. She does not eat the bread of idleness. She's ready and willing. She doesn't just leave off of things. Well, I'll just get it later. Well, I'll take care of this later. Or it might be something placed on a honey-do list later. No, she's willing to care for the things that needs to be cared for. And notice in verse 28, her children rise up and they call her blessed. They call her blessed. And really, their life is actually being lived out praising their mother. Not because they know their mother's going to get mad at them if they don't. They're just saying, my mom, man, man, she does this, she does this, she does this. I mean, they're just rejoicing in their mother. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. This here is reflective. I think it is speaking of also the mother that is teaching to him. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that what? Fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. It all starts, the foundation of all of it is first to begin to fear God. Because all that you're doing, the service that you do in your household, the way that you teach them and instruct them, the way that you lead them and provide for them and everything, it's not simply that, well, we got to be the best so we can put it on Facebook so everybody can look and see how wonderful the house looks and how great. You better act straight. You're doing it unto the Lord. You're doing it to please him. And again, we go back to what she said. She said, you are the son of my vows, my dedication. I've given you to God, to God. And when you get to that point where you say it's all about him, Lord, my family, my household, I just want to raise them to please you. You're in the right place. You're in the right place. Who can find a virtuous woman? That's why they would seek to learn this even more. I'd have to say my wife has been so faithful in teaching our children and homeschooling them. We believed long ago, I'm not saying this to say that everybody has to homeschool their kids, but I think some people, they really do find excuses to be made, so they just don't do it. And some people say, I just couldn't. I think you could. It's not, I'll tell you this, My mother did the best that she could, but it was very difficult for her. She had GED education, and she taught us as far as she could, and then she had to work and everything. We didn't get the education that we needed, but the fact was, what's insane is that we still were able, because once you're able to teach them to be able to study for themselves, to learn and think for themselves. My wife, she has many times said, I just don't feel like I'm adequate. I don't think I'm doing what I need to do. But she has been faithful. And even at the snide remarks that some people will say, how come your children ain't in school? How come you're not doing this? Well, what do you do all day? And there were times when we began to start out teaching them, there were ones that would, you don't work? You don't work? You don't do this? You don't do that? And she would just kind of have tears in her eyes at times. And I'd say, honey, you're doing what you need to do. We have to raise them unto the Lord. And whatever position you're in, I understand it's different for many people, but I'm just encouraging. Give them to God. And wherever you are, just say, God, help me to be able to raise my family. And you may be the grandparent, the great-grandparent, but you can still be able to say, God, I'm going to give them to you. I'm going to try to just speak words of kindness, words of wisdom, and I want to try to teach them to love you. Well, let's pray this morning.